Hello, how are you today? It's Thursday, nearly the end of the week. If you like historical fiction and nonfiction, if you want to know about an author who's published 21 books, and if you'd like to learn 4 ways to promote your new book, stay tuned. Hi, I'm Patricia Durkin, the Christian Message Coach, and this is Marketers on a Mission. We present we present marketing tutorials and interviews to help Christian writers and speakers take their message online. This is episode 119. My guest, historian and author, Rebecca Price Janney. Hello, Rebecca. How are you today?
Hello, Patricia. Just fine. Delighted to be here.
Well, we're tickled to have you. You have no way to know this. History is my favorite topic in the entire world.
Oh, nice.
And so I'm salivating, getting able to talk one-on-one with a historian who's so accomplished. I'm very excited about this interview.
Well, thank you. I am too.
Good. You've been able to focus and achieve goals all of your life. You graduated from Lafayette College, Princeton Seminary, received your doctorate from Biblical Seminary. But before all of those accomplishments, you encountered a newspaper editor at the age of 15.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
I had been writing for about a year, so I figured I was a seasoned professional by then. And I went to the editor of my local newspaper and told him that I'd like to have a job. And he nearly laughed me out of his office. And as he could tell, I wasn't really going anywhere. So he had this huge, remember those old metal filing cabinets?
Uh-huh.
Yes, he had one, and it was huge. And he pulled a drawer out of the bottom, and that thing made a really loud noise, and it was stuffed. And he said, "Why should I hire you when I could have any one of these?" And he informed me that in that file cabinet, he had the resumes of many college graduates. Mm-hmm. And here I was 15. So I said to him, because of these, and I handed him my little portfolio, and it had all the articles that I had written and published. And to his credit, he actually read them. Mm-hmm. And I didn't know what he would do, but when he finished, he said, "You impressed me, kid. I think I'll give you a 2-week trial." So he said I should write about anything I wanted to, which was great. And he said, "But I'm not going to pay you anything." And I said, "That's all right." So I went home and I wrote 2 articles of a pretty satirical nature. Mm-hmm. And I went back 2 weeks later and he said, "Well, kid, my readers really liked you, so I think I'll take you on." And then he said, "But you need a beat. What would you like to write about?" And that's when I told him I wanted to cover the Philadelphia Phillies. And his mouth just dropped open. And he said, "I should learn not to let anything you say surprise me." But he called the Phillies publicity department and said, "I have somebody here who would like to cover the games. Can you give her a press pass?" They said yes. And as far as anybody knows, I've asked many people, I believe I was the first female to cover a Major League Baseball team. Oh. Now, not for any large outlet. It was just a little podunk newspaper, but I believe I have that distinction.
You have several distinctions. You're very highly accomplished. You have broken some barriers for women. Not necessarily that was your focus, but it did happen that way.
I agree with that. It was not my focus, but it happened.
Yes. And then authored so many books. But you give Christ all the credit, don't you?
I try. I do indeed.
Have you always known him, or did you grow up in a Christian home?
I did grow up in a Christian home, although it was kind of a split home. My dad was a non-practicing Catholic. My mother was Protestant, and I was raised in a sort of a Baptist home. And yeah, sort of Baptist. And I remember accepting Christ at a vacation Bible school when I was about 5 years old, and just followed him, through my youth. And ironically, that same summer that I started writing for the Phillies, our church had changed, the leadership had changed. And my Sunday school teacher was very angry with me before class one morning. And he cornered me and he said, "You little Jezebel." And I didn't even know what that was. And he said, "You've been missing church." And I explained about writing for the paper, but even though I was going to Sunday games because it was the only time I could get to the stadium, that I was still going to youth group and church whenever I could. And he said to me, "You're going to have to choose between God and the Phillies." And I said, "Well, if God is anything like you, I think I'll take the Phillies." And I decided not to go back to that church. And there were about 3 years that I really did not go to church. I didn't stop loving Christ at all and considered myself still to be a Christian, but I was getting pretty far away. And when I was 18, that all changed, because even though I had had a lot of early success, there was a kind of emptiness in me. And when my closest cousin visited me from California, a vibrant young Christian woman, I realized what I needed. I realized that I had to get back, and that not all Christians were like that Sunday school teacher. So that's how my faith journey began, and I've been following him ever since.
Mm-hmm. And he's led you to all these colleges and all of these seminaries and so many opportunities at work for what did your writing? We're going to talk more in depth about your writing in a moment. Did your writing start out as a hobby, something to do that you enjoyed and became more of a business?
I don't think so. It's interesting. I've never been asked that before. No, I don't think it was a hobby. I was pretty serious about it. And there's a story behind that too, which probably won't surprise you, but I wanted to be an astronaut. And for most of my youth, that was my goal. And then in the 8th grade, we all had to go see our school principal to discuss what we would study in high school. And I knew I wanted to go to college because I wanted to be an astronaut. And when I told her about that, she said, "There are no female astronauts." This was a few years before Sally Ride. And I didn't really think that should stop me, so that didn't bother me. But then she started looking at my math grades and said, "You seem to struggle with math." And I wasn't stupid, it's just that it didn't come naturally to me. And I began to sink further and further into the chair. And then she said, "I'm told that you write really well. And have you ever considered being a reporter?" And I said that I hadn't. So I went home and I prayed about it. And I asked God to give me some kind of sign. And about 3 different opportunities presented themselves very shortly after that for me to enter writing contests. And I won each time I entered and realized, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. So that was my approach. I think that I saw it as a career choice, and why not get started then?
Yeah, you don't, there's no grass that grows under your feet, is there?
I don't think so. I was very driven.
And then later the conversation with the newspaper editor. And,
yes.
And beyond that, hundreds of articles that you've written.
Yes. It just was something that I loved to do. And I made the switch to history when I graduated from high school, because I realized that I loved history even more than I loved baseball. And as much as I enjoyed covering the Phillies and traveling and all of that, it wasn't enough to fulfill me intellectually. So I thought that that would be more of a hobby, and that I really wanted to have a more serious kind of writing career. So that's how the turn to history came. but I had always loved history. My parents were really into it, and I remember having books in the house all over, and they would always talk about famous people and give me biographies. I remember reading very early on a biography of Franklin Roosevelt and how he overcame polio. And that was the kind of story that really moved me and still does.
And thought just went whoosh. We'll come back maybe. So going back to history, you belong to the Daughters of the American Revolution. Now,
I do.
I've heard of them all of my life, and I have never met anyone who belonged to it. And you not only belong to the organization, but the Valley Forge chapter.
Yes.
I mean, talk about cool, Rebecca. Tell us about them.
Well, I had no idea that I had a connection to a patriot. I just know, have you ever watched those ancestry shows?
Mm-hmm.
And people will say, it's funny, I always had this inclination towards Indian food, or I always loved baseball. And it turns out they had a baseball player for a great-grandfather or something like that. I was born waving a flag. And when I was young, it wasn't cool to be patriotic. It was during the Vietnam War, and the flag was being burned in the streets. And there were people who were feeling kind of bad about our country after Vietnam and Watergate. But I never seemed to have gone through that. I just always would tear up over patriotic music, and I didn't know why. And when I would ask my grandmother where we came from, she had no idea. She didn't even know her grandmother's name. So there was all this mystery. And then I would say 6 or 7 years ago, I thought, hey, I'm a historian. I have these research skills. Mm-hmm. I'm going to start digging. And when I dug, I kept going deeper and deeper into American history. And that's where I found my patriot. So I thought, wow, I always liked the DAR, what I had heard of it. I liked that they wore gloves and hats because I'm a little bit formal. And I thought that was pretty cool. But I didn't ever imagine I could be a member. So yeah, and then because I live near Valley Forge, I'm a member of the Valley Forge chapter.
It just seems to me that every meeting would be rich with insights and connections and new pieces of information. Is it that way?
It can be. We have a lot of fun too. We're a very fun group. And we have speakers and people who will come and talk about maybe clothing in the American Revolution or lack thereof for the soldiers. We had one woman who told us about the language of handkerchiefs. Who would have thought? We learned about women patriots at Valley Forge, and we talk about all sorts of things, but it's also a service organization. Mm-hmm. So we do a lot of service-oriented things for especially veterans. Mm-hmm. And the DAR owns about a half dozen schools across the country for less fortunate children who in another era would have been called orphans. Mm-hmm. And so we do a lot to raise awareness and raise funds for those schools and for the veterans. So we do a lot too.
I did not realize there was a connection of service to the orphans, what would be called orphans in another era.
Yes.
I was familiar with the veterans service that you offer. Mm-hmm. That's very intriguing. So you have both ends of the spectrum, don't you?
We do. Absolutely.
What role did Easton, which is the name of a city,
yes.
And Lehigh, am I pronouncing it correctly, Lehigh Valley?
Yes, Lehigh Valley.
What role did those two locations play in the Revolutionary War?
On July 8th, 1776, Easton became one of the first 3 communities in which the Declaration of Independence was read publicly for the first time. And it was in front of the courthouse in Easton. Easton was also the county seat of Northampton County at that time, and still is, although Northampton County is much smaller now than it was in that day. And that's basically the role that it initially played. And then during the war itself, it was at a crossroads. It was at the forks of two significant rivers, one being the Delaware River. And therefore, it was a crossroads between New York and Philadelphia, the North and the South. And so a lot of prisoners were kept there, British and Hessian prisoners, and a lot of wounded were also brought there. And I understand that John Adams stayed there and the Washingtons came through because it was a hub. So it was very important in the Revolution.
Just hearing you talk, I just am such a fan of history. I just want to get in my car and go there.
I'll show you around.
I'm not sure why I have that bent, but
well, you have a story to tell too.
To say that I'm interested is an understatement of great proportions. Let me check Facebook really quickly. I think we had a comment there. Let's see. Oh, yes. Chloe Flanagan is a fellow author. She says, what's a sad story about the Sunday school teacher? She's so glad that God sent you examples of loving Christians later.
Yes.
One random comment.
Yes.
Pierce our hearts, can it?
It really can, especially to a vulnerable teenager. And it was a long time before I was able to forgive that. But I think God even used that. He does.
Yes.
He tends to take those broken things and put the pieces back together in a way we couldn't have imagined.
And it also makes us more sensitive in our own communications, doesn't it?
Yes. Oh, yes, it sure does. Absolutely.
Well, let's talk about your books. You've got 21. You have written 21, both fiction and nonfiction.
Yes.
Starting, if I'm understanding correctly, in 1993. Is that right?
93, 94, yes.
And that was with a mystery series for youth.
It was with Word Kids, and they brought out two series, one for boys, one for girls. And Bill Myers wrote the boys series, The Wonderful Worlds of Wally McDougall, and I wrote the Heather Reed mystery series, which were loosely patterned off of the Nancy Drew series that I grew up with. And I had 8 books published before the run stopped, but that was a lot of fun.
That's a pretty impressive beginning, isn't it? 8 books.
It was. It's funny because I went for several years before I found a publisher, and during that time, I had lunch with an editor I had been working with on a magazine, and I went to that lunch feeling a little full of myself because I thought he was going to be so happy and thankful that he had somebody of my caliber writing for him. And as we were starting lunch, he said something very complimentary. I'm really glad you're writing for me, but I have something to tell you, Rebecca. Your writing is boring.
Really?
Yeah. Another comment that pierced. I had no idea what he was talking about. Again, I asked him what he meant, and he was right. He was right that I had the technique down, that I was a pretty good storyteller, but I had no color, no flash, didn't know how to use metaphors or similes. And it turned out that dear editor who gave me my start as a teenager I always called him the Joe Friday of journalism, just the facts, ma'am. So that's what I learned. And that wasn't bad necessarily. It's just that I had to grow out of that. And this next editor gave me a sort of prescription for what I should do. And the first thing he said was to read good writing. And he gave me examples of periodicals, newspapers that were known for their excellent journalism, and to delve into classic children's literature, because he thought even things like Dr. Seuss, he said he was a master at word usage and imagery. So I found myself reading all these things I hadn't read when I was a kid. Anne of Green Gables. I devoured the works of Lucy Maud Montgomery during that time, and I began to understand what he meant. And I rewrote the book, my mystery book, and resubmitted it, and that's when it got accepted.
Oh, so he was still open to the changes that you were willing to make.
I have learned, Patricia, that one of the most important things as a writer is to have a teachable spirit, because ego can really get in the way. And I think I've read the works of master writers, and a few of them, as they get older or more established, start getting a little sloppy. And I think that maybe sometimes editors are afraid to tell them, you know, I'm just this editor, maybe a young editor, I can't tell so-and-so what they're doing wrong. But all along the way, I have had editors who have been very open and sometimes blunt about my faults. And even though I haven't liked it, it's not enjoyable, it's been good for me.
Well, you must have understood what he said and applied all the lessons that he suggested, because you've got a 3-part series that you've published one volume each summer.
Yes.
But John Ferling, his review of your latest release, which you have there beside you, Easton at the Crossroads, he says, thumbs up. This is a great review. A thumbs up for a work of fiction that might easily be confused with a historian's account of the original of George Washington's soldiers. That is some review right there.
It really was. I treasure that. And Dr. Ferling is a prolific and wonderful writer himself. And he helped me to be as authentic as I could about the battle scene that I wrote, and about the plight of some prisoners of war, that they were imprisoned after the battle, and my ancestor was among them. So I got to know very up close and personal what it was like for him and his men to undergo that trial. So thank you, Dr. Ferling.
And you've also written nonfiction as well, also historical.
Yes.
Tell us about those, please.
After the Heather Reed series, I did a short-lived series with Multnomah about homeschooled kids who time travel. And the only way they can get back to their home is to solve a historic mystery. So, for example, they had to solve the mystery of the lost colony, the Roanoke colony. They had to solve the Loch Ness Monster mystery, and what happened to Amelia Earhart.
Wow.
And we were going to do more, but then Multnomah closed its children's division. And I met an editor at a writers' conference who asked if I would consider doing some historical nonfiction, and I was very eager to do that. So the first book was Great Women in American History, and it only recently went out of print after more than 20 years. And then Great Stories in American History. So I was working on those things. And then about 10 years ago, I wrote a book called Who Goes There? A Cultural History of Heaven and Hell. And I looked at American attitudes about the afterlife from the very beginning until now, and how they've changed and why. And then after that, that was with Moody, I did a follow-up book on the American family and how that's changed and why. And then I did Great Events in American History for AMG. And then I was inspired to do this novel about my ancestor. And I had always loved the works of Jan Karon, her Mitford series. And I thought I would like to write a series that's similar in feel, but Easton would be Mitford. And Easton, unlike Mitford, is real. And my family actually goes all the way back to the founding of Easton. So I have very deep roots there, and I grew up there. So that's how that idea came about. And yes, now we're on book 3 of the Easton series.
Are there more coming?
There are. My publisher, Elk Lake Publishing, very generously said after my contract for 3 ran out, you write as many as you have in you.
Whoa.
So yes, I was thrilled. I was very thrilled when Deb Haggerty told me that. And I think I'm working on 4 now, just started. And I think 4 or 5.
Mm-hmm. Feels right.
I think so.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, I'm not sure at this point.
Any significance to them being each of them being released in the summer, or does that just fit your schedule?
It's because we've been releasing them around Easton Heritage Day. Every year on the Sunday closest to July 8th, which, as I said, was the date in 1776 that the Declaration of Independence was read there. Mm-hmm. They have a festival. And the crowning jewel of the festival is at noon, when a man who is a wonderful actor dresses up like the man who originally read the Declaration and surrounds himself with people dressed in colonial outfits, myself among them, and he reads the Declaration of Independence. And then there are other reenactors. There's what you would have in any festival, food and tours and games and all kinds of fun things, fireworks.
It must set your heart on fire every year to hear that read again.
You know, when I'm standing there, I realize that I'm standing in the exact spot where my ancestor stood. And I'm getting a chill just talking about that.
I'm about to cry.
Yes. Actually, there have been moments in the past couple of years where I have been in tears, and knowing in advance what was going to happen to them when they marched off. And when they get to that line, their lives, their fortunes, their sacred honor, that gets me every time.
Yes, yes. Mm-mm-mm. Ah.
We're having a moment.
Yeah, I'm just breathing it in. I may have to get a tissue to my eyes here in a moment. I'm also a big flag waver. I haven't produced the works that you have, but I'm very patriotic, and it just, I watch the flags. If they start aging, somebody needs to take care of that flag. I don't even have any responsibility at that location, but we got to get this taken care of. I love the movies. I love the books. I love everything about it. I would have gotten myself in a lot of trouble in the Revolutionary War days because I would not have been able to be silent. We have a few more comments. Pat Jean Davis says, she has 3 things. Enjoying this interview with you, Rebecca.
Thank you.
Wonderful to hear that ELP is waiting for you to write another book. And she says, me too. I'm guessing that she's referencing that she's also very patriotic.
Oh, that's nice.
Yes. There's not enough vocal patriots. We have plenty of non-patriots who are very vocal, and we're not going to solve that problem today. But in my small sphere, I am the big flag waver and proud of it.
Keep up the good work.
Now, you also speak very widely, and even though you speak to the DAR, other DAR, Daughters of American Revolution, and sometimes, and you just described the clothing at the festival
yes.
that you often wear, but you talk to a whole lot of other, in a lot of other venues, don't you?
I do, and this goes along with one of my marketing tips, that you need to know your audience and know who might be interested in hearing about what you write. So for me, obviously, it's people interested in history, and specifically American history. So that would lead me to venues like historical societies, county historical societies, to organizations like the Rotary Club or the Lions Club, and they always need speakers,
yes.
To the Sons of the American Revolution or the Patriotic Order Sons of America, which is a similar organization. Schools are usually interested, and that would be college level, high school level for me, although I did speak to my son's middle school a couple of years ago because I had that in. It was a natural sort of thing, but they were very attentive. And churches, synagogues, libraries, almost all of those are interested in themes from American history. And then, of course, because it's based in Easton, I'm always getting invited by different groups in Easton to speak there. So that's a natural sort of segue.
Well, I want to ask a follow-up to that, but before I get to my follow-up, are you considered, forgive the term, a celebrity at Easton, in the Easton area?
Well, I don't know. It's not like I can't walk down the street and people recognize me. It's nothing like that. Although I've had a couple people say, oh, you look familiar. But I usually enjoy walking into the Siegel Museum, which is a local history place, or in the Marx Room of History, local history at the library, and I get recognized there, but whatever.
Nice, just nice.
It's very nice. It's sweet. I enjoy it a lot.
Going back to all of the very practical places that you mentioned, do you contact them? Now you already have a reputation, you're established.
Yes.
But in those early days, did you knock on their door electronically or digitally in person via letter, contacts?
Right. I still do that. And in the early days, I would send, this was right on the cusp of the internet. So I had a brochure made, and I remember sending that brochure out to a lot of women's groups. And mostly like at churches, librarians were very interested. Interestingly, synagogues, schools, and so I would just maybe twice a year send out a big mailing. And then when the internet and email came along, then I started doing it electronically. And even now, when I have a book launch, as I just did with Easton at the Crossroads, I have a list, an email list that I send a press release to, or a more personal letter, depending on who it's going to let them know that it's coming. And social media helps. But I also make sure that whenever I speak, I have a rack card. And this one has the titles of the 3 Easton books, and then it has my website on it. And then I have a business card. And I always keep those handy because normally when I speak somewhere, 9 times out of 10, someone comes up to me afterwards and says, oh, could I have one of those? Would you be interested in speaking at our group? And that seems to generate more activity.
Those are the words we always want to hear after a presentation, aren't they?
We do. It's not like they're slinking out of the back door and, oh, I never want to hear her again.
And that rack card, it fits right into a business size envelope, doesn't it?
It does.
So it's handy. You can pop it in the mail if you need to.
Yes, and they aren't very expensive through Vistaprint, and they always have these coupon codes or promo codes, so I've been able to save a lot of money that way.
I know that years ago, speakers had what was called at that time a one sheet, but your rack card takes the place of that now?
I would say so. And then because it has my website on it, people can just go right there and find out anything they want. Well, in general. I don't talk about my favorite food or my favorite flower or anything like that, but in general.
Your website's very nice, and I really like that clothing that you had with the straw hat, in the colonial times at the festival, I'm sure.
Yes.
It must be very hot, though. I have a lot of friends who are doing that in their various locations across the United States. And it seems like all of those gatherings are in the middle of the summer and they've got 500 pounds of clothes on.
It's so true. I'll tell you, when those clothes come off at the end of a day like that, I am very grateful. It just makes me grateful for what I have, and grateful for the sacrifices of the people who came before me. So I think, boy, if I can be uncomfortable for a few hours, think about what they went through every day.
They must have been totally drenched all the time and without an easy access to filling up a bathtub full of water.
Exactly.
I feel bad for them.
Yes, yes. Their hygiene definitely left a lot to be desired.
The only plus is that everybody had the same issue.
There you go.
So you didn't stand out in the crowd because of poor hygiene. Nobody had good hygiene. It just wasn't even available.
Yes.
For the most part. So you have some marketing information you were going to share with us, 4 ways that you promote your books each time they came out. And you've got 21 under your book belt, so you've got a protocol now, don't you?
I do. And as I mentioned, I do have a list of influencers that I send the information to. I try to have about maybe 10 to 20 books that I'll actually physically send, depending on the person. And so that's the first thing that I do. And social media, get the word out. And social media makes it so much easier anymore to do that. So that's probably the first thing that I do. And then the next thing is getting all those launch venues in order. So we have been launching the Easton series in conjunction with the Easton Heritage Day. And the last 2 years, we've expanded it to the Saturday before, because the Easton Farmers Market has a big event. So this past July, when Crossroads launched, my friend who portrays Robert Levers, who reads the Declaration of Independence, has organized a group of reenactors called the Flying Camp. And they were the ones I wrote about in this book. So we did an event together at the farmers market, which was huge. So I make sure that before the book launches, I set up about 3 or 4 speaking engagements or appearances. So that's really important. You want to get it out quickly, but then you need to sustain the momentum too. And that's a little tricky because I don't want to wear people out. And I like to remind them the book is there, please read it. But one way I do that is to run contests on social media. You know, if you answer this question about American history or about Easton, you'll be entered in a drawing to get a copy of the book. Okay. So that's another thing that I do.
And those are relatively easy. You're not going nationwide or internationally. Those are relatively easy to do once you've got your system down pat, aren't they?
Exactly.
And people don't mind being reminded when there's something in it for them.
Yes, exactly. I recently learned that when I was doing a marketing webinar, and the guy said, if you remember one thing, remember that the reader wants to know what's in it for me. And so that's become a kind of mantra, if you will, for me, that with each book, there's a theme, but I need to tie that theme to that question, what's in it for me? So with Easton at the Crossroads, the thing that I ask is, have you ever done everything you know to be right and everything still turns out all wrong? And that helps readers connect instantly, because I think we've all had that happen. Why did I go out on a limb and do what I did or say what I did, and yet it still wasn't well received? Or I did the right thing at work and I still lost my job. I mean, we've all had it happen. So that's how I try to make that work. And then make sure that in the story, they do come away with that sense of, well, this is how they handled it. And hopefully there's inspiration for the reader to handle his or her own trial or challenge.
I love that first line in that description because I saw it when I was online doing my research, and I thought, oh yeah, that's going to get everybody's attention. It's so compelling and clear,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a promise there, isn't there?
Yes, there is. And that's new for me, but it's working.
Yes.
And I like connecting with readers. That's really important to me.
I appreciate that, mentioning that. Oh, Janet McHenry has joined us. She says, hey, ladies.
Hi, Janet. Janet's a good friend from a long time ago.
We are new friends, and I'm really enjoying getting to know her. And Scott Janney, I think you might know him. He says, hello.
Let me see. Scott Janney, yes. That would be my husband. Hi there.
Now, you mentioned also something to me earlier in some of our emails going back and forth that you had an unpleasant experience with a venue that invited you, but then didn't introduce you, you were sitting there. Tell us about that.
I have learned the hard way that you really need to do your homework in advance about an invitation. You need to make sure if it's going to be successful that the organizers are going to place you. What I'm talking about is a venue where you're usually not the center of attention.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a speaking engagement per se, where people have come to hear you. It's something that's more general, a more public event. And this was at a community festival. And the organizers were not very organized. And when I got there, nobody seemed to know what I was doing there. And I didn't really have a chance to be introduced or to talk about my books at all. It was just, I sat there at a table in the heat, sweltering with my family, and people were just sort of walking by looking at me like, oh, that's interesting. What's she doing here? What's this all about? And I didn't sell a single book that day. So that was pretty rough.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't really know enough going into it, although the person who was organizing my being there had left. So it was just, it was kind of like nobody's fault.
Mm-hmm.
It was one of those things, and they will happen to all of us.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that in general, I do ask some hard questions if people invite me just to be part of the general audience, because that has not worked very well for me.
It really doesn't sound like it would be very beneficial to almost anybody because of what you're saying. There's no emphasis on anything.
Right. And if you can't make that connection to a reader, you're just an author sitting there who might be frightening to a passerby.
Mm-hmm.
You know, oh, I can't talk to her. She's an author. What will I say?
Yeah.
But if you are able to speak or make that connection, then that's very different.
Mm-hmm. So the 4 ways that you promote your book, and we merged a few of them and got a few new ones, but that's completely fine because they were all excellent. You send hard copies out to those specific influencers that you've already had a long connection with.
Yes, or people who I know would definitely be beneficial if they like the book. They would be in a position to tell others about it.
Mm-hmm. You also put notices out and run some contests on social media so that the people you're already connected with and the new ones that get scooped up into that mix, they're aware of it.
Yes.
You tie in what your book launch and other related events that could be created. You either create them or tie into other people's or other organizations' events.
Exactly. And for example, at Easton Heritage Day, I might not be the focus of Easton Heritage Day, but we did set up a table outside the historic church that had been used as a Revolutionary War hospital, and that was a natural tie-in. So that actually did work because people were coming by to see the historic church, and they saw my books and thought, oh, this is interesting. So that's one example where that actually did work.
Mm-hmm. And you have to test, don't you?
Yes, you do. Oh, and Scott was playing his fiddle outside the church.
Ooh.
So, yeah, that drew people. And I might say that the handsome person portraying Peter Kitchline on the books is my husband.
Oh, good to know.
Yes, he was portraying Peter Kitchline before the books came out, and it just seemed a natural tie-in to make him our cover model.
That's a cool element that I've not found in my research. So I'm glad you shared that tidbit, because that's an important piece of information.
Yes, it is.
Let me check one more time. Pat says, all helpful tips on promoting your book. We're nearly finished. We really need to move along and finish, but I've got to ask you about your press releases. Can you give us any insights on them?
Yes, I do have a press release for each book in the series. And I used to write press releases when I was in college and in high school, but it had been a very long time. So I think I just did a Google search of press releases and did a little research about what the basic elements of a good press release were and started to create them. And then I would run them by the publisher and ask for input. And that's what we ended up doing. And then I would use parts of the press release for the back copy. Mm-hmm. And you just kind of, when you have a theme and you have that hook, mm-hmm. then all of the press releases and the announcements are around that theme and that hook.
They fall under that umbrella, don't they?
Exactly. So the press release would include things like the name of the publisher, their phone number, their website, contact information about the book, and at the bottom, a little bit of information about me and where I could be contacted.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's not a magic formula. It's just learn how to do it and then do it.
Exactly. And make sure it looks professional. Go over it with a fine-toothed comb so that you find any typos, because, I hate typos. And it may be easy to find a typo, but autocorrect can be a real problem because it can change something and you might not even be looking for it. And then after it's out there, oh no, that stupid autocorrect turned this word into that word, and that wasn't good.
I have so enjoyed visiting with you today.
Thank you, Patricia. Likewise.
I'm going to have to get all my history books out now and start reading them all over again, because I can read them over and over and over. The facts don't change and the stories are the same if it's the same book, but they just touch me.
Yes, they do. And I'm actually in the process of creating a podcast. I would like to tell short stories about American history on a podcast. So that's another venue that I'm looking into.
That sounds like a fabulous fit for you. Are you thinking maybe early next year, possibly?
Oh, I'm thinking in a week or two.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Let me know, and I'll be glad to forward people there.
Thank you.
In my social media.
Thanks, Patricia.
You're very welcome. I so enjoyed it. It's wonderful. Next time when number 4 comes out, swing back by because we want to talk to you again.
Oh, thank you. I would love to.
Thank you for joining me, and viewers, thank you for joining us. We appreciate you. We're here for you. We want to help you spread your message online. This has been Marketers on a Mission, episode number 119. My guest, Rebecca Price Janney. Tomorrow is Q&A Friday, baby. 2 of the items I'm going to cover are how to finally get over your hesitation, please, about promoting yourself. You've got to get over that obstacle, and how to add alternative tags to your WordPress website. Michelle Rayburn mentioned that on Tuesday. I want to show you how to do that. We'll do a screen share. We're here every weekday at 12 Pacific, 3 Eastern, to help you develop or refine your online marketing skills so that the message of Christ can get around the world. Until tomorrow, I'm Patricia Durkin, the Christian Message Coach, and Rebecca Price Janney. We both wish you well. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you tomorrow.